The folder was thick. That's the first thing Marcus noticed. Not the stranger's face, not the clipboard, not the fact that it was 28 degrees and the man on the porch was wearing no coat. Just the folder, cream-colored, tabbed, the kind that suggests someone spent careful hours putting it together. He stood in the warm doorway of his parents' house, turkey still on the table, his mother calling something from the dining room, and he took it without fully understanding what he was holding. Then he read the cover page, and his face went the color of the winter sky outside. That moment is where my story ends. But to understand it, really understand it, you need to know where it began. Honestly, I've been sitting with this story for a while, trying to decide if I should share it. Because it isn't a story about revenge, even though people will call it that. It's a story about the moment you finally stop explaining yourself to people who were never really listening. And I think a lot of you know exactly what that moment feels like. My name is Claire. I'm 36 years old. I'm a senior client relations manager at a commercial insurance firm in the Galleria area of Houston, Texas, and I have been for as long as I can remember the kind of person who handles things quietly. I pay attention to details. I track what needs to be done. I do not make performances of my effort. And for a long time, I believed that made me a good partner. What I did not understand was that in a room full of people who weren't looking, quiet competence is almost entirely invisible. Marcus and I had been married for just under 3 years when that November arrived. We had spent most of our marriage living in his parents' home in Katy, a 4-bedroom house in a quiet cul-de-sac, the kind of neighborhood where American flags stay up year-round and someone always has a leaf blower running on Saturday mornings. The arrangement had been sold to me as temporary. His business had stalled a logistics software startup that kept running into the same wall, and the rent on our apartment in Spring Branch was climbing. His mother, Renee, had offered us the second floor, 2 bedrooms, a shared bath, a kitchenette that was more symbolic than functional. And I said yes, because that's what you do when you're building something with someone. I covered more than half our expenses. Utilities, groceries, our car note, my student loans, a portion of the household costs that Renee never quite acknowledged as my contribution. I did not make a production of it. Marcus had ideas, and I had believed with the cautious optimism of someone who still had faith that his ideas would eventually become something. A new app, a consulting arrangement, a friend who just needed seed money. I kept the lights on while he worked. That was the deal, as I understood it. What I did not understand was that Renee had her own version of that deal in her head, and in her version, I was something between a guest and a tenant. Marcus had been divorced before I met him. His ex-wife, Nicole, lived 20 minutes away in Sugar Land. They shared a son, Caleb, 8 years old, with his father's quick laugh and his own quiet, watchful eyes. Caleb spent every other weekend with us, and I liked him genuinely. He was the kind of kid who notices things adults miss, and he accepted me with the easy grace of a child who has already learned that families come in unusual shapes. Nicole and I were not enemies. We maintained a careful, courteous distance, 2 women circling the same center of gravity without ever colliding. Until the night, Renee decided to change the orbit. It started at the dinner table on a Wednesday evening, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. I remember the candles were lit. Renee liked candles at dinner, a habit she kept from when the kids were small. Earl, Marcus's father, was methodically working through his pot roast. Marcus was telling a story about a pitch meeting that had gone well, and I was listening, and things felt almost like they were supposed to feel. Almost. Marcus, Renee said, setting a dish down with just enough weight to signal intention. Did you tell her? I noticed the glance between them. Quick. Practiced. Already finished before I could fully read it. She already knew. Marcus cleared his throat in that particular way, the small sound he made when he was about to sand the edges off something sharp. I invited Nicole to join us for Thanksgiving, he said, with the tone of someone mentioning a slight change in weekend plans. For Caleb, it just makes sense. I set my fork down. I placed it parallel to the plate because control, even over a small thing, felt necessary. You could have said something, I replied. My voice surprised me even. Clear. Almost detached. We're telling you now, he said. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal. Renee's mouth curved slightly satisfied. Certain. Caleb shouldn't have to choose between his parents on a holiday, she said. That's not fair to him. I looked at Marcus. His father was focused on his plate. Marcus himself had already eased back slightly, the way he did when he felt a conversation had concluded in his favor. She's been family to us longer than you have, Renee added, her tone factual rather than cruel, the way someone states the temperature or the day of the week. My son deserves to have both a mother and a father in the same room for one day. The room did not change physically. The candles kept burning. Earl chewed. Renee smoothed her napkin, but something inside me went very, very still. I want to pause here because I know some of you are already leaning forward. And I want to be honest with you about what that moment actually felt like, not what movies tell you it should feel like, not what you might assume. It didn't feel like rage. It felt like clarity, like a window wiping clean, like I had been straining to see something through fog for months, and suddenly every detail was sharp and close and undeniable. I had been in that house for over 2 years. I had bought the groceries in that kitchen. I had written the check that kept the internet running. I had sat at that table on Christmas, on birthdays, on every Sunday that required being present. And in the most casual sentence Renee had said to me in 3 years of knowing her, she had summarized the whole arrangement. I was not family. I was adjacent to it. Useful, but not essential. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't demand that Marcus defend me, and he didn't offer to. I simply finished what was on my plate. I excused myself politely. I walked upstairs, and I took the black tote bag I had already packed 3 weeks earlier, and I walked back downstairs, and I went out the side door. Nobody stopped me. Nobody asked. The cold outside was sharp and clean and honest, and I stood at my car for a moment, with one hand on the door handle and just breathed. November in Houston doesn't get cold like other places. It gets cold quietly, a dry, low chill that settles in your chest rather than your skin. It felt like the right temperature for the decision I had already made. I had been preparing for 6 weeks. Not impulsively, not emotionally, but methodically. I had moved my direct deposit. I had closed the joint checking account and opened an individual account at a separate bank. I had separated my savings, transferred my holdings, and met twice with an attorney named Patricia, who had a no-nonsense office on Westheimer and a reputation for treating clients with exactly the kind of respect I had stopped receiving at home. The filing had been finalized 4 days earlier. The process server had been scheduled for Thanksgiving evening, the timing not chosen for cruelty, but for certainty. I needed Marcus to be somewhere he couldn't immediately respond. I needed the papers to reach him when the weight of what he had been allowing would be impossible to ignore. I checked into an extended-stay hotel near Greenway Plaza that same evening. A modest room, a small desk, a kitchenette that actually worked. I unpacked what I needed and opened my laptop and looked at the folder I had built over 6 weeks: bank statements, insurance policies, tax returns, a clean and careful documentation of a financial life I had managed entirely while everyone around me assumed it simply existed on its own. It is a strange thing to realize how invisible your contributions have been. The lights stay on, the bills keep getting paid, and then, gradually, the system reveals exactly where it was propped up. At home, the doorbell rang at 7:43 in the evening, right as Renee was cutting into the pecan pie. Marcus opened the door to a man he didn't recognize, holding a folder he would later describe as looking like something that had been put together by someone who wasn't leaving anything to chance. The man asked for him by name. Marcus confirmed. The man handed the folder forward and said 4 words. "You've been served." Then he left. Marcus stood there. The warmth of the house, the sound of silverware, Nicole's voice asking Caleb something about school, all of it continued behind him like a separate reality he had temporarily been removed from. He walked back inside. The folder was still in his hands. He sat at the table with it the way a person sits down after bad news, slowly, as if sudden movement might make it worse. Nicole noticed first. She always had been the more observant one, Marcus told me later. She looked at his expression, and she knew before the folder was even open that something significant had shifted. "What is it?" she asked. He set the folder on the table. The sound it made was somehow heavier than a folder should sound. Renee pushed her chair back slightly. "Who was at the door?" "It's from Claire," Marcus said. Silence. Not loud. Not theatrical. Just immediate and complete. Even Caleb went still at the end of the table, the way children go still when they sense a change in pressure they don't yet have language for. Marcus opened the folder. He read slowly, then faster, then slower again. In the way you read something when you keep hoping a different meaning will surface if you give it enough passes. Dissolution of marriage. Financial disclosure request. Asset division. A date from 4 days ago at the bottom of the final page. My signature below it. Clean and steady. She filed 4 days ago, he said. Everything is already in process. Renee made a sound of dismissal. She's being dramatic. You invite your ex-wife to a holiday dinner and she files for divorce? That's not a reasonable response. Marcus didn't answer her. He was still reading. Nicole folded her hands on the table. She didn't say anything yet, but her expression had shifted to something careful and searching, the look of a person who is calculating how much to say. She's moved her accounts, Marcus said finally, his voice slower now. Closed the joint checking. Transferred her savings. There's a note here about independent holdings. What holdings? Renee demanded. She works at an insurance office. What is there to hold? She's a senior client relations manager, Marcus said, and he paused slightly after the words, as if saying them out loud revealed something he had let stay blurry for too long. She manages corporate accounts. Policies worth millions of dollars. Renee waved her hand. That's just paperwork. Marcus didn't argue. He flipped to the next page. Nicole leaned forward slightly. If she's moved accounts and filed already, she said, choosing her words with care, it means she organized this before tonight. This wasn't a reaction to dinner. I want to stop here for a second. Because this is the part that people always get wrong about this kind of story. They assume it was about Thanksgiving. They assume it was about Nicole being at the table. They assume it was about one remark Renee made about who qualified as family. And those things mattered. They mattered enormously, but they weren't the cause. They were the moment the surface finally showed what had been forming underneath for the better part of a year. If you've ever stayed somewhere too long, absorbing small dismissals until one ordinary evening, something in you just quiets and becomes absolutely decided, you already know exactly what I mean. You don't need me to explain it. You lived it. Marcus tried to call me that night. He tried twice more in the morning. Then a text. Then several more texts over the following 2 days, starting with confusion and ending with something quieter and more uncertain. I read all of them. I did not respond until the evening of the second day. And when I did, I wrote one sentence. We can speak through our attorneys going forward. Diane, my colleague at work, put a cup of coffee on my desk Monday morning and looked at me for a moment and said, You made a decision. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. Then you'll be fine, she replied. And she went back to her desk, and that was the most perfect thing anyone said to me that week. Back in Katy, the household began to notice its own mechanics. The internet went out on Thursday. Earl called the provider, frustrated. But when Marcus looked at the account, he discovered it had been transferred and rebilled to a different address. Mine. The utilities followed, not terminated, not cut off, but reorganized under my name. Every account I had opened, managed, and maintained for 2.5 years was mine to transfer, and I had. The house wasn't dark. The heat still worked. But the scaffolding had shifted, and now everyone had to look at it directly for the first time. Marcus called 2 attorneys that week. Both told him, in slightly different words, the same thing. She is prepared. You are not. His mother couldn't understand it. She's a receptionist, she said at one point. She's not, Marcus said flatly, for the second time in a week. Fine. Whatever she is, she can't just take everything. She's not taking everything, Marcus said. She's taking what's hers. There was a long pause. And then Renee said, Well, what's hers exactly? And Marcus looked at the folder on the kitchen table and didn't answer, because the honest answer, everything that was running, required him to acknowledge something he wasn't ready to say out loud yet. On the 8th day, he sent a different kind of message. Shorter, no urgency, no explanations. Just, can we meet? 1 hour. You choose where. I won't push. I read it 3 times. I recognized the shift in tone, quieter, stripped down, like a person who has stopped trying to make their case and is simply trying to be seen. I replied, Saturday. 11. The coffee place in Sugarland off Highway 6. He was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table. A coffee in front of him, untouched. He looked different than I expected. Not broken. Not frantic. Just aware. The way people look when they've spent several days in honest conversation with themselves and arrived somewhere they didn't expect. "Thank you for coming," he said. I said I would. For a moment we sat with the silence between us. It wasn't hostile, it was the silence of two people learning a new vocabulary. "I've been going through everything," he said finally. "The accounts, the bills, the structure of everything." I nodded. "You were holding more than I knew." "Yes." He exhaled, not dramatically, just fully, like something had needed releasing for a while. "I should have been paying attention." I didn't rush to fill the space he left. I used to do that. Fill his silences, smooth his transitions, make sure the conversation stayed comfortable. I was done doing that. "It wasn't just the money," he said after a moment. "I know," I replied. "It wasn't." He looked at me then. "Why didn't you say something?" Before any of this, I met his eyes steadily. "I did," I said. "You just weren't listening." The words weren't an attack. They were accurate. He knew they were accurate. He looked away and turned his coffee cup slowly on the table. "Thanksgiving," he started. "Wasn't the beginning," I said. "It was the moment it became impossible to pretend I hadn't already decided." "I thought we were okay," he said quietly. "I thought we were partners," I replied. He was quiet for a long time after that. Long enough that I heard the coffee machine behind the counter and someone outside laughing at something on their phone. "I didn't mean for things to feel that way," he said at last. "I didn't mean for you to feel like an afterthought." "I know," I said. "That's the part that's hardest to explain to people. It wasn't intentional. It was just habitual. The way things settle into patterns that suit everyone except the person doing most of the sustaining." He nodded slowly, absorbing that without trying to reframe it. "What do you want now?" he asked. I considered the question the way it deserved to be considered, not emotionally, but honestly. "I want to live somewhere I am included in decisions about my own life," I said. "I want to stop being someone's practical arrangement. I want a life where my presence is chosen, not simply assumed." "And us?" he asked. "Is there any version of us left?" I let that question sit, because it deserved a real answer, not a comfortable one. "Not the version we had," I said. "That version didn't have room for both of us." He closed his eyes briefly. Opened them. Nodded. "I'm sorry," he said then. And this time it was different, not tactical, not a pivot, just offered. Simple and too late and real. "I know you are," I said. And I meant it. We sat for a few more minutes without speaking. And then I stood. And he didn't try to stop me. And I walked out of that coffee shop and back into the November air and thought about what it means to stop carrying something you were never actually supposed to carry alone. This story taught me something I want to say directly to you before I finish. The mistake most people make is assuming that quiet means content. That someone who isn't arguing has accepted the situation. That the person handling everything without complaint is fine. The most dangerous kind of dismissal isn't cruel. It's casual. It's forgetting to ask. It's assuming that because someone can manage, they want to manage, forever, without recognition, without partnership, without simply being seen. What I understood that nobody else in that room did was this. Paperwork doesn't negotiate. Life decisions don't dissolve because someone is startled. What you build quietly, you can dismantle quietly. And the time to build something better is before the moment of crisis, not after. If you are holding something up right now, financially, emotionally, logistically, that nobody around you seems to notice, I want to ask you one question. Not to push you toward any particular choice, but just to sit with. Is the life you're sustaining the life you actually want? Or are you simply the one who's always there? Because you've always been the one who stays. That's worth thinking about, genuinely. The divorce process moved forward without drama. Assets were divided. Accounts were closed and redistributed. The final paperwork was signed on a Tuesday morning in Patricia's office, and I felt no triumph, no grief. Just the clean, particular feeling of something finished. Marcus and I spoke once more after the finalization, in a parking lot outside a courthouse that smelled like winter air and exhaust. "I think I understand now," he said. "Not everything, but more than before." "That's more than before," I agreed. He gave a small, wry smile. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Claire." "I already have," I said. And I meant that too. I found a townhouse closer to my office. Nothing extravagant, 2 bedrooms, a small back porch where I could sit with coffee on Sunday mornings and hear nothing except traffic 2 streets over and the occasional dog. I chose everything in it. Every piece of furniture, every shelf arrangement, every plant I may or may not manage to keep alive. The space is mine in a way that nothing had been mine in a long time. Renee sent me a text 4 months after everything was final. It was about an insurance form, something complicated, something she hadn't dealt with before. She had my number still. She used it. I replied professionally, clearly, with exactly the information she needed. A few hours later, a single line came back. Thank you. No apology. But something. A small, reluctant acknowledgement that I knew something she didn't, and that she had chosen to reach out. People don't always come around dramatically. Sometimes they just quietly begin to show up at the doors they previously overlooked. Now I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll take a second to actually answer it. Type a 1-inch the comments if you think Claire made the right call preparing in silence and letting the papers do the talking. Type a 2 if you think she should have confronted Marcus and Renee directly first before filing. Type a 3 if you've been in a situation where you were doing the most and receiving the least, and you stayed longer than you should have. I want to know. Genuinely. And tell me where you're watching from. What city are you in? What time is it there? I always love knowing who's in this with me. If this story hit something real for you, if it touched something you've been carrying quietly, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Stories like this don't go viral because they're dramatic. They go viral because they're true. And this one is true in the ways that matter. If you want more stories like this real, grounded, human, consider subscribing. I share one every week. You won't regret it. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences. Fully rewritten and reimagined in Houston, Texas to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is entirely coincidental.